Many times on AIDS Vision, we've talked about the government's response to AIDS, or sometimes the lack of it. But now we have a whole new crew. We have Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich and all his friends. How will this affect things, and what can you do? Find out next on AIDS Vision. Welcome to AIDS Vision. I'm your volunteer host, Allison Arngrim, and today we're going to be talking about how you can get involved in influencing government's response to AIDS. And with me today to talk about this is Carmen Hernandez, who is the Government Affairs Coordinator for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Also, Howard Jacobs, who is the Grassroots Assistant at AIDS Project Los Angeles. And Jacquie Szabo, who is a board representative from LA Shanti. Welcome to AIDS Vision.
Thank you.
I think the first thing you should do is explain what it is you do. What exactly is your function? Howard, explain to us.
My responsibility is to take the constituents who are infected or affected by AIDS and try to get them involved in the political process. We do that in three ways. One is through our Citizens Network, which is a letter writing campaign.
Now, I've gotten mail on that. I've received those. A lot of people watch this show have. And the Citizens Network, what does that actually do? I mean, say you send in your card, what happens?
We will target a certain level of government, being local, state, or federal, on a specific HIV/AIDS issue. We will then brief the constituent on what exactly is going on and provide a sample letter, where we ask them to write part of that sample letter, as well as tell their personal story on why that congressperson or that state legislator should be concerned about HIV/AIDS, and they in turn will send that letter in. As it relates to the congressional office or whatever level of government, they will track those letters to see how their constituents feel and should then influence their vote.
So since they have to keep track of how many letters they're getting for, against, and what's going on, this actually has an effect.
It has a tremendous, tremendous effect.
Now that's Citizens Now. What does Activate You?
Activate You was a conference that we put together to try to get people, first of all, to understand the legislative process and the bad bills or good bills that we foresee coming into the future, to get them involved in our second group, which is called Neighborhood Network. And what Neighborhood Network does is that we take constituents into their local, state, or federal official's office so they can lobby one-on-one.
You actually train people to go in and lobby.
Exactly. And really what it is just telling their story on why they are affected by AIDS. And we all are affected by AIDS. This is actually a really tremendous program because they'll meet one-on-one with the elected official or with their staff person and educate them on what is happening with HIV/AIDS in the community. We also have a third network, which we call the Rapid Response Network. And what that is designed to do is that as amendments are added onto bills, be it in Sacramento or in Washington, those amendments can be decided on within hours. So we fax out these kinds of action alerts, and instead of having the constituent make write a letter, they actually will make a phone call to the elected official, telling them how they should vote on the amendment and why they should be concerned.
Isn't that a situation then, since these bills can go through within hours, that the average person doesn't normally know this is even going on until it's too late?
Exactly. And the influence of the constituent really will help the legislator decide how they should vote on the issue and the impact that issue will have upon their constituents.
And now, is this what you're doing with AIDS Healthcare Foundation? What is your function there?
Actually, our Government Affairs Department works a little bit differently. Since we have patients and residents that are actually already in hospices or coming to outpatient care, we don't necessarily have that much access to them. Sometimes they want to stay a little bit more private and don't want to participate, and they just want to come to us for their care. So what I do is coordinate a lot of our state legislation and track bad bills at the state level and write letters and get people to call, mostly call or write letters, and work in coalition with other organizations like AIDS Project Los Angeles, and being a professor the last 2 years at Activate U, and informing the constituents about bad bills and how they can mobilize against them.
So if you see a bill that would adversely affect the people you have in hospice who aren't in a position to run downtown and lobby, you get on the phone to him and you get the people in Activate U, whatever, doing something about that.
Yeah, and I'll get on the phone with the sponsor and their staff in Sacramento, and I'll say, hey, what's going on? Give me the lowdown. I'll talk to other lobbyists who are our friends in Sacramento, Planned Parenthood, Life AIDS Lobby, and then APLA Sacramento office, and try to get them mobilized on the effort also.
So to bring everyone in. And then you're working also with LA Shanti. Now, what is it you're doing?
I'm the client rep to the board of directors, and I'm a woman who's been living with AIDS for 11 years now. I have benefited tremendously from LA Shanti's emotional support groups that I've been going to for the past 5 years. And just recently I found out about Activate U. APLA put that on over the weekend, and I was a participant. I learned a lot on how to get involved and not feel so unempowered. I learned, we dissected bills and bad bills, good bills, and where they're weak, where the legislation is weak, and where we could strategize and talk to our legislator on what they can do to help us with the issues that are important surrounding AIDS.
Would you say there's still a lot of people, people living with HIV, people involved in the community who still sort of see the government and their response to AIDS as this thing that sort of happens and you just kind of, you vote and then that's it, and then you just sort of moan about it later? How do you change that?
By first of all realizing to people that there's a power behind their personal story, and the way that they can use that story to help influence and improve the quality of their lives. And you have to make them understand that it is government for the people, by the people, and when they see actual results. And I'm going to use the example, last year we got a $5 million increase from Governor Wilson on the HIV/AIDS budget. Probably 90% of that had to do with bringing constituents up to Sacramento for our AIDS Budget Lobby Day and talking to the legislators and telling them the impact that AIDS has had on every district in California. And when they can actually see accountable results, they realize that government is there for them. You know, and realizing that you can pick up the phone and talk to your legislator.
So what has happened to us, what's happened to me, what has happened to individuals is actually important and can be used to influence government.
Sure, and government needs to know. They need to understand why these programs work and when programs don't work, and the power that it has over our personal lives.
Now, one of the things that, of course, has happened now since the election is there's a tone in government right now that I and a lot of other people find kind of disturbing. You know, it's never been easy, but this new tone, how do we deal with that? Do we have now people in our government who really just don't care, who have attitudes influenced by homophobia and other concerns that are going to make it much more difficult to reach them even with a personal story?
I think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was just going to comment that one of the reasons that the tone has changed is that a lot of new legislators have been so distanced from HIV and AIDS for such a long time. They've never had it to deal with it in their family, or if they have, they just have put it on the outskirts. Now what is happening is, like Howard was talking about, these visits are even more important. We've started petition campaigns and really getting that going so that people that don't want to go in to visit or make a phone call can simply sign their name and address and say, hey, I'm a voting constituent in your district. And that's really what needs to happen. At a grassroots level, we really need to mobilize now. We need to go in there and not yell at them, but let them know our personal stories and let them know what's going on. And hopefully, as we begin to educate them, that tone will change a little bit.
I was going to say that I went with Neighborhood Network last week to talk to Michael Antonovich about an issue that we felt was very important, which was mandatory testing for HIV for pregnant women, and the possibility of that kind of legislation being passed. And we went down, and we didn't get to see him, but we did speak with his staff person, and that is one thing that I learned at Activate U is just as important. Not that you have to always get in to see the senator or the congressman. The staff is who you need to develop the relationship with. And we talked with his assistant, and she will likely influence and help.
They go to their staff for a lot of decisions, don't they, actually?
Definitely.
What actually will happen is that as they're walking in to vote on the bill, their staff will say, "This is how you feel about the bill."
You know there have to be people operating that way,
Of
that
course,
sometimes
of
getting
course.
to the staff actually works. What are some of the bills and issues that are happening right now that people need to know about?
Actually, on a local level, our Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors was talking about the mandatory testing of pregnant women due to a study that came out that said that AZT could lessen the transmission rate from mothers to child. The fear that we had is that it sets a bad precedent on mandatory testing, and if you mandatory test people, it seems to drive the people away from the system, people who need it the most. And so it was a matter of educating the staff and the supervisors on what that means and the impact that it will have. On a federal level, we're very concerned about the reauthorization of Ryan White, which is happening right now. Without those Ryan White funding dollars, many of our organizations will simply not exist, and the types of services for people living with HIV/AIDS will no longer be around. And the issue on the federal level is that will it be done in a block grant kind of program, or will it be done as a program grant, which it is now. Block grants are very frightening to us because they automatically assume that the system will become more efficient, and they take money away. It also will mean on a state level we will be competing with every organization to try to pull out money, which means there'll be a lot of infighting. And really, the point is...
And don't we already have that now?
We have too much.
I mean, we already have fighting for dollars, so you're saying that this, if they do a block grant, would be dramatically increased?
Tremendously increased, and we find a fear. And the way the bill is structured right now, it's very efficient. 95 cents of every dollar goes to the client. All the money is heading through local planning councils, so local communities decide exactly how the money is handled. And we now have to figure out, with the new tone in Washington, how Ryan White will be reauthorized and how it will fit in with the contract with America, you know, and it has to, because AIDS, as we know, affects everybody.
At this point in the so-called contract with America, is there any space for AIDS or AIDS policy? Are they addressing that?
Actually, the Ryan White hearings will be happening this week in the Senate, and that's with Nancy Castlebaum and Ted Kennedy, who run the Education and Commerce
Subcommittee of Appropriations. Yeah.
Is there something that people can do who are watching now to influence those hearings that are going to be happening?
Absolutely. Now is the time to call our senators. Now is the time to call people who are on those committees. And you simply can call AIDS Project Los Angeles to find out who are the key members on those committees that they need to get in touch with and tell them their personal story and why Ryan White is so important and why it does not need to be block granted and why AIDS is somewhat of a unique kind of illness.
And now you also help them to educate people. So, for instance, learning the difference between block grant. The average person may not know what that means. They know they need funding. They know there's Ryan White money. They know we haven't gotten the money yet, but they don't know why or how that's explained and what the part that the senator is voting on, what that is. So you explain that to them so that they can relate this to the senator?
Exactly, and I think Jackie is the greatest example.
It's the most wonderful program I've ever been involved in. They actually have all these articles that on each issue, and then what are the defects in proposed legislation, and how to actually arrive at the conclusion that certain things need to be changed in the legislation. They actually gave me a huge book full of information on how to make contact and develop relationships with staff, who to contact, what their voting records are. We had workshops over the weekend. Carmen gave a really good one on how to understand different legislation, pieces of legislation.
So actually your volunteers at this point may be explaining the bills to the legislators.
In many cases, that really is certainly with staffers, you know, and especially local staffers who are not in Washington and see the process working, who handle the actual problems that constituents feel in their district. We're also in the process now of taking neighborhood network members to see their congressmen who are on a little bit of a recess, to explain to them what Ryan White is, and again, to tell the power of their personal story and how those Ryan White monies affect them.
Right. May 8th, we're going to Sacramento.
Yes.
Yes.
Members of Neighborhood Network.
We're having a field trip. People can sign up.
It's statewide AIDS Budget Lobby Day, May 8th in Sacramento. And then there is also the Federal Lobby Day.
Sure, we call it AIDS Watch. But I want to talk a little bit more about the Sacramento Lobby Day, because it's a broad-based coalition from organizations in Northern California as well as Southern California. AHF playing a part of it, and AIDS Project Los Angeles certainly playing a big part of it, as well as LA Shanti. And we bring constituents on a bus, and we schedule appointments with every single assembly member and every single senator.
So we can sign up for this. We're going to go actually to a PSA USA right now.
Great.
And we will come back and you can explain how we
And I'll
can
tell you
go to
all.
Sacramento.
Mi scusino, ma voi usate preservativi? Ma non mi disturba! Ma come questi gente?
还没有，不过以后就会啦。
Kau hera ni he we na me ka pata te wahi ne pai noi ho.
Bien sûr, t'en as pas une, tu vas folle, hein, j'ai pas envie de mourir d'une disease. Ah non.
아마 인디아 캐네벨 파이방아데 저도 많이 했던 데스 까
So, are you using condoms?
Welcome back to AIDS Vision. Now you're going to tell me how we can go to, you want to go to Sacramento? How do we go to Sacramento? This is to, and harass people and
By
explain
bus.
life to them.
Again, it's not to harass, it's to teach and to educate, and that's part of the role of Neighborhood Network. The first step in getting involved is to know that the first Monday of every month from 7:30 to 9 at AIDS Project Los Angeles, we have a Neighborhood Network briefing.
First Monday of every month.
Of every
Okay.
month. And we educate you on the current issues. And so you'll need to know how to lobby and know how to tell the power of your personal story. And then to get involved in getting involved in the AIDS Budget Lobby Day, it's simply by calling 213-993-1680, finding out a little bit more about what we do, contacting us, making sure that we know that you're educated enough to meet with your legislator, and then just signing a form and hopping on the bus with us. We'll get you up to Sacramento and get you into your legislator's office, so you can tell
Now,
them.
is this a free bus ride?
It's a free bus ride, although there is a hotel cost involved.
Okay,
And
so
the hotel
you
cost
have
is
to put yourself up, but you
it's
can get
minimal.
the free bus ride. Okay.
Exactly. And again, to meet your legislator and their staff and tell them how HIV has affected your life. We also have AIDS Watch, which is a national lobby day in Washington, D.C. And APLA does offer some scholarships, although you may have to get there on your own and get your own hotel also. Although you'll get a chance to meet with your congressperson as well as your senators. And last year we met with both Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and all the LA County congressional representatives. And told them why we needed Ryan White reauthorized, why we need more money for prevention education, why care, research, and all the other federal dollars that come into our county and what it does. And again, it's telling your story. And by law, you have the right to do that. Our congresspeople work for us. Our senators work for us. We pay them.
Well, in theory, not only do you have the right to do it, in theory, you're supposed to kind of have to do that.
You have to
if
do
you're
that. You're
not
absolutely
doing
right.
this, are you not abdicating your responsibility?
Completely. And there are certainly state representatives who you have to constantly remind them of that. It is their responsibility. And they need to be educated.
Now, what are some of these bills that we need to be on the lookout for? These are the things that we're going to be talking about if we go.
Yeah,
Sacramento.
well, on the state level, there have already been a few bills introduced. One of them would be to cut disability benefits for injection drug users. So this could mean potentially, now we haven't had this clarified yet, but it could potentially mean that if you got HIV through injection drug needle use, you could be ineligible for disability, which a lot of people know. A lot of PWAs know that at some point in their lives they have to go on long-term disability or disability benefits. So that is something that's out there. It's being put forth by a rather conservative senator, and that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. We maybe need to write letters or go visit him. A lot depends on what plays out in the first committee, so we have to see what happens with that.
So this is a case of someone who's saying, well, they just don't want to fund drug abuse, but the little thing of like, well, yes, but what about people who are sick because blah, blah, you'd be cutting them off and they have like no idea.
And there's no
This hasn't
understanding
occurred
that. No, a lot of that has to do with cost cutting.
to them. And they don't think these things through, apparently.
No, obviously not. And I don't think that they realize that it actually will affect people with AIDS. He probably just went through and said, oh, we don't want to contribute to drug abuse. Let's cut the money. We'll save here, we'll save there, and it won't affect anybody, only those druggies or something, So that's an example of a bad bill. There's also some talk about mandatory testing bills, mandatory testing for
This
boxers.
comes up again and again. Mandatory testing for boxers?
Mandatory testing
What?
for boxers.
Wait a minute, what?
This is an idea that has been talked about in Sacramento. We haven't actually seen the language yet because the deadline is next week. But it was an idea put forth by a senator saying, well, let's mandatorily test boxers as athletes who can sometimes come in contact with bodily fluids, blood, you know.
Well, then hockey players are next, yes?
Well, that's exactly...
Take it down to Little League.
Exactly the slippery slope that we're trying to avoid. And one of the things about these elected officials not being educated on HIV issues, that's what happens. Oh, it's only going to be boxers. Oh, it's only going to be, you know, Little League. Oh, it's only going to be, you know, and those are the kind of issues that we're dealing with. So we really have to prevent them from even getting started on that tangent and dealing with mandatory testing.
Can we get George Foreman to come in as a celebrity rep on this?
I mean, we can laugh, but it's actually extremely frightening. Some of the tone in Sacramento as it relates to mandatory testing bills, as it relates to names reporting. Last year, there was a Los Angeles County assembly person who introduced a quarantine bill. You know, and
They
we
do that every few years too.
we constantly have to fight these what we call bad bills that negatively impact the quality of life of people living with AIDS.
Well, has there been any attempt to get across the concept of what we need is massively free and accessible testing to everyone who wants it, but not forcing people to be tested where it would affect their insurance and the confidentiality issues?
Sure.
That the more people are allowed to get it free without questions being asked, people do go and get tested. They have studies now showing that when it's offered in that manner, people are willing to get tested, and when they're forced to be tested, they tend to just stay away from the doctor or the clinic altogether.
Sure.
Last year, as part of our augmentation, the $5 million that Howard was talking about, $2 million of those dollars went for anonymous testing and going to existing sites. Now, one of the problems, though, that we're facing is, although we got increased funding, the money was not distributed right away. In fact, it's still being distributed, and a lot of that is bureaucracy, going through the Office of AIDS and dealing with that whole process. So we were successful in getting more money for more efforts in anonymous testing. However, the money is kind of just now being put out there.
Is there a way to fight that? I mean, is there someone, can we send a busload of people to go talk to the people who are involved in slowing this down and creating the bureaucracy?
Well, I think that's actually where Neighborhood Network comes in, and where the power of those stories really have an impact. By saying, you know, and I'm going to use Jackie as an example. I am a woman who is living with AIDS, and these are the services that I need and that I have to be provided with. And the money that you're holding on to affects me. And they now put a face with an issue. And it gives them the ability to touch them and to move the bureaucracy and to realize that things may not be as efficient as they possibly could be. And again, it is by bringing people into their offices and helping to educate. With term limits now in California, our job as educators are becoming that much tougher because our legislators are not staying in office as long. And that's really, I think, the issue that we're fighting right now in the state of California is how do we constantly educate and re-educate our legislators and their staff so they don't introduce bills such as quarantine, as bills such as mandatory testing or names reporting, and to help them understand the impact those bills have upon the quality of life.
That they're not just pushing pieces of paper, that there's human beings involved.
This is me.
It really accomplishes nothing. Mandatory testing, for instance,
it drives people away.
It really does, and also
it doesn't even achieve what they might think.
It's not achieving
they were
anything.
hoping to do.
For instance, one piece of legislation that was proposed last year that will probably come up again is mandatory testing if a child in a school bites, scratches, or whatever a teacher. To test that child doesn't and reveal the confidentiality doesn't do anything to tell you what what the victim's status is. You have to be the victim has to be tested. But by testing the child,
incidence of transmission through biting is
very small.
Doesn't happen a lot.
That bill actually even includes spitting. You know,
includes spitting, which is pretty much impossible.
It is impossible. It is impossible. And again, it just goes to show you the amount of work that we have to do and how people can get involved and we need.
So there's people writing bills who are not clear about, in fact, what fluids even transmit HIV.
Yes.
Correct.
And this has to be brought across. Is it more difficult? I'm seeing this intense fear, homophobia, a lot of things going on in government now that open homophobia and AIDS phobia that wasn't really acceptable to even talk about a few years ago is now being talked about. Does that make it more difficult? Does it make it more difficult when they say, well, we don't really like the human beings involved?
More constituents to come out and say that this does matter, that this is not just a homosexual disease. This affects everyone, and if they don't do something about it, it will affect everyone eventually.
And I really do encourage anyone that has been affected by HIV in any way gay, straight, whatever you are, to come out and get involved. When I was at the women's conference in Los Angeles, Women in HIV, they had a panel of HIV-infected women. 4 out of those 5 women had been infected through heterosexual contact.
Okay, so we're going to close now, so we're going to be running the numbers on the screen. Listen, this is your chance. You've seen what's going on, the way the tone has changed. This is your opportunity to tell people in government that this is not pieces of paper, this is actual human beings, that this is you. So please call, join us on the bus to Sacramento, join us talking to people. If you don't want to go to Sacramento, you can make phone calls, you can write letters, and they'll even teach you how. Give us a call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everywhere I turn, there's always lots to learn, and just as many reasons as to why. You and me got choices, so listen to the voices inside us that say don't quit, don't cry. So while leaning on each other, brothers known as brothers, and strangers we've decided there are none. To life's unanswered questions, appeals and rejections. Indeed, this is a race that must be won. All it takes is love for everyone. At any given moment, though you may think you've blown it, you can make a friend out of a foe.